Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Janice Lo. Here's a look at tonight's top stories. Israel steps up its war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip as internet and phone services are cut. Wang Yi tells Joe Biden that China and the United States must improve their relations quickly. And locally, John Lee says the elimination of below-par subdivided flats has to be done in an orderly way. Israeli ground forces and warplanes have been in action as Israel escalated its war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Relief organizations lost contact with their staff in the besieged enclave after communication links were cut off. Israel released videos of its warplanes taking off for the Gaza Strip on bombing missions that are reported to be the heaviest so far in the war with Hamas. The airstrikes are said to have hit 150 targets, including tunnels, and killed a Hamas leader. Explosions lit up the night sky as Israel escalated its military campaign against the group that rules Gaza. The Israeli army also provided footage of ground forces operating inside Gaza. Tanks sent in yesterday still remained in the besieged enclave as Israel expanded its military operations. Hamas said its men were fighting back near the border. Trapped Palestinians and relief agencies have lost contact with the outside world after the internet and phone links were cut off by the airstrikes. Civilians say the bombardment has been the worst so far. With hundreds reportedly killed in overnight airstrikes, the Palestinian death toll has risen well above 7,000, nearly half of them children. Israel failed to smash Hamas after 1,400 people were killed in Israel in a surprise attack 3 weeks ago. As Israel ramped up its bombardment of Gaza, a peace rally in New York forced Grand Central Terminal to close briefly. The demonstration, organized by the group Jewish Voice for Peace, attracted hundreds of people who occupied the railway station. At least 300 protesters were arrested. The mainly Jewish demonstrators wore T-shirts that read "Ceasefire now" and "Not in our name." A rabbi at the rally said there can only be safety if there is justice and equality for Palestinians and Israelis. Following an impassioned debate, the United Nations General Assembly approved a resolution on Gaza, calling for a humanitarian truce and the protection of civilians.
There's no going back to the status quo as it stood on October 6th. We must not go back to the status quo where Hamas terrorizes Israel and uses Palestinian civilians as human shields. And we must not go back to a status quo where extremist settlers can attack and terrorize Palestinians in the West Bank.
It is amazing that when my friend from Canada insists on naming the organization Hamas, that he does not feel the need for the equity and balance and fairness for which Canada is so well known. He does not feel the need to name Israel for killing 7,000 Palestinians.
The resolution was passed with 120 members voting in favor. 45 abstained, while the United States was among the 14 who voted no. The resolution is non-binding, but it sends a clear message that most countries want the carnage to end. At least 32 people have been killed and 60 injured in a chain collision in Egypt. Online footage showed many vehicles on fire, with heavy smoke billowing into the sky. The accident involving a passenger bus and several cars happened 130 kilometers north of the capital, Cairo. An oil leak from one car apparently triggered a fire that led to the multi-vehicle crash. Rescue efforts were hindered by traffic congestion caused by the collision. Foreign Minister Wang Yi has told U.S. President Joe Biden that relations between their countries must improve as soon as possible. At their White House meeting, Biden said the United States is willing to maintain communications with China. Chloe Feng reports.
U.S. President Joe Biden held an hour-long meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi at the White House, with the Chinese official conveying President Xi Jinping's regards to his host. Wang said his mission is to help stem the decline in Sino-U.S. relations and put them back on a healthy and steady development track as soon as possible. But he said the United States must uphold without interference the One China principle and the three China-U.S. joint communiques, which he described as the most important political foundation for bilateral ties. Wang was referring to Washington's stance on Taiwan. He said China and the United States have to act responsibly for their fundamental interests and live up to the expectations of the international community. Biden in turn conveyed his greetings to Xi, adding that the U.S. is willing to maintain communications with China to jointly respond to global challenges. He also expressed condolences on the death of former Premier Li Keqiang. Wang's White House meeting followed 9 hours of talks with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. The foreign minister's 3-day visit is also aimed at laying the groundwork for a potential meeting between Xi and Biden at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in San Francisco next month. Beijing has yet to indicate whether Xi will travel to the U.S. Chloe Feng, HKIBC.
In Hong Kong, the chief executive says getting rid of below-par subdivided flats should be done in an orderly manner. John Lee added that landlords who lease undesirable flats should be penalized. Almost 3% of Hong Kong's population, or 220,000 people, lived in cramped subdivided flats, many of which are considered unsafe. Speaking on a radio talk show this morning, the chief executive said such flats which are below standard must be eliminated. He has given a task force 10 months to set a minimum standard for subdivided units. But he said it doesn't mean that those considered above par are deemed desirable.
We have identified some subdivided flats under very bad situation, whilst a certain number, their conditions aren't too bad. So we need to differentiate what are those we should tackle and what are those we should improve and what are those that we should not allow.
Lee emphasized that there has to be a penalty to deter people from renting subdivided flats that are deemed undesirable.
What is also important is to ensure that this will be tackled in an orderly manner. Whether the family lives in an acceptable standard subdivided flat or below, still it is their home.
The task force will talk to tenants, landlords, and groups in contact with subdivided flat occupants in their survey. The chief executive has expressed his deepest sympathy over the death of former Premier Li Keqiang. John Lee's message of condolence came 24 hours after state media announced that China's former number 2 leader had passed away. Chloe Feng reports.
I express deep sympathy for the passing away of former Premier Mr. Li Keqiang. About 17 months ago in Beijing, former Premier Li handed over to me the order to appoint me.
Chief Executive John Lee offered his condolences a day after state media announced that Li Keqiang has died of a heart attack at the age of 68. Lee remembered his encounters with the former number 2 leader.
What impressed me most he kept reminding me to develop the economy so as to address people's concerns about livelihood. Whenever he spoke to me about Hong Kong, I felt very clearly the deep love that he had for Hong Kong.
When asked whether Hong Kong will hold any events to commemorate the late premier, the chief executive said the government will closely monitor announcements from Beijing. Xinhua News Agency announced the news of Li's death at around 8 a.m. yesterday, but the official obituary was only released at 6:30 p.m. It was signed by senior Communist Party officials who praised Li as an outstanding leader of the party and the state, and said his death was a huge loss for the party and the country. Funeral arrangements will be announced later. Chloe Fen, HKIBC.
Market experts have questioned the effectiveness of an investment migration scheme to attract more capital from wealthy overseas individuals.
That scheme is not going to do much for immigrants because it's way too high. $30 million, I don't think people can do through other schemes at very, very much lower level of capital. But that's one thing that I think it could be good for the bond market, for secondary market, for the Hong Kong stocks, because $30 million, even if you have $30 million at your disposal, it's way too much to spend on Hong Kong stocks in a single bet.
Under the Capital Investment Engine Scheme announced by Chief Executive John Lee in his policy address, those who invest $30 million or more in assets, excluding property, can apply to stay in Hong Kong. The amount is $20 million more than when the scheme was suspended in 2015. Lee dismissed concerns that $30 million is too much, saying many investors have expressed an interest because of Hong Kong's stability. A theme park in Shenzhen is closed this weekend after 2 roller coaster cars collided, injuring 8 people. The Happy Valley Park only confirmed the accident 6 hours after it happened last night. Both cars were damaged and have not been removed. None of the injuries was said to be life-threatening. A man who works nearby was skeptical about the number of people reported injured, saying he believed it was higher. Onto the weather now. It will be mainly cloudy with a few showers. Temperatures will range between 24 and 27 degrees. Fine and dry next week. That's our main news for Saturday night. Join us for more news at 11. I'm Janice Lo. Good night.